Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be reviewing the performance of number 62, Kevin Labanc. Now, Labanc came into this season with many of the same faults as he had in his admittedly short career. He was, again, pretty ineffective at even strength. He was taking some really bad penalties at times, even in the offensive zone, which is, of course, the worst place to take penalties, and his defensive game still left a lot to be desired. And so it looked like there was very little change in Kevin Labanc's game from one season to the next. But if there was a Sharks player who you could point to who improved the most over an 82-game regular season, you could very well point to Kevin Labanc. Again, as I said at the start, he was struggling, and with his struggles early on in the season, considering that, this could have been Erik Karlsson only year as a Shark, which didn't end up being the case, and it could have been Joe Pavelski's final year as a Shark, which did end up being the case. I felt Kevin Labanc was the most movable asset, most valuable asset that the Sharks could get rid of to make a big splash at the trade deadline, and partial credit goes to Doug Wilson for not thinking that as well, but full credit has to go to Kevin Labanc because he showed some really big improvement, especially post All-Star break, and you do have to give credit to his frequent line mates, Joe Thornton especially, who some people say took Kevin Labanc under his wing during this regular season, as well as, some credit would go to Marcus Sorensen. Now, in the regular season, Labanc did play all 82 games, which for a young player who doesn't necessarily have a top 6 spot in the lineup is quite impressive. Not just for avoiding injury, but of course for avoiding getting healthy scratched. He had 17 goals and 39 assists, a pretty nice assist total for 56 points. Of course, a career high for him. A -1, certainly nothing to feel bad about in this case, as well as 20 power play points. So, of course, Kevin Labanc came into this season with the reputation of being a bit of a power play specialist. He found himself pretty frequently on that first power play unit, locked himself a spot really there near the end of the season as well. And even his 36 even strength points that go with those 20 power play points, since he has no shorthanded points, of course, is still pretty impressive, especially when you consider the ice time that he does get, which is 14 minutes, and a good chunk of that is power play ice time. He only has about 11 and a half even strength ice time. Now, during the playoffs, he again played every single game, all 20 of them with 4 goals, 5 assists, and 9 points. And for a third line forward, 9 points in 20 games, especially in the playoffs, does seem impressive. But of course, a caveat does have to exist for Kevin Labanc, as 4 of those 9 points did come in a single period on a single power play in Game 7 against the Vegas Golden Knights. And so in the other 19 games, he only had 5 points. He was also a -7, as that certainly goes to show the struggles that the third line in general, not just Kevin Labanc, did have defensively during the playoffs, as it really wasn't consistently that great. His 4 power play points, of course, are those 4 power play points he got in that Game 7, as well as his time on ice that climbed a bit, but not too much, with 14 minutes and 51 seconds. However, the majority of that ice time, that extra ice time, comes from the fact that Labanc got a few seconds extra, a couple dozen seconds extra of power play time, because his even strength ice time went up a bit, but really nothing to write home about. And when you consider that the playoffs, again, I've said this in multiple reviews, have these lengthy types of overtimes, it's interesting to see just how many of the players actually get increases of ice time and by how much. Labanc gets a small increase here in terms of even strength ice time, so it does show that Peter DeBoer, while he recognizes Labanc is a force on the power play, and he recognizes likely that Labanc did show very notable improvement during the regular season, that he's still not necessarily ready to take on a role of defending a lead or even playing in a tie game in pretty tight situations. If there was a player on the Sharks who I felt whose game was maybe least built for the playoffs, you could arguably put Kevin Labanc up in that role. For the grades on the year, as I said, they certainly display the fact that Labanc did get much better from Game 1 to Game 82, with a C+ in the first quarter, a B- in the second quarter, a B in the third quarter, and a B+ in the fourth quarter. So always going up by a single grade. In the playoffs, it did fall off. As I said, Labanc having issues with that third line, him and Sorensen and Thornton all pretty struggled in the playoffs, you could definitely say, as well as the fact that Labanc's game is not necessarily built for a playoffs type of environment. As such, he gets a C+ in the playoffs, which gives him a final grade on the season of a B-. Pretty decent, still looking forward to next season on his now 1 year, $1 million contract. Very much a prove-it contract, and the fact that he'll likely find himself in the top 6 next season. It'll be very interesting to see what the next step in Labanc's career is. Class dismissed.